WNST here as the Ravens go out to Cincinnati on Thursday night. Luke Jones and I will be on the scene at Paul Brown Stadium for the chili and for the battle of the undefeateds. The Cincinnati Bengals getting by the Colts after being down by a couple of touchdowns. Here to join us from the Queen City at WLWT in Cincinnati, it's George Vogel. He's Vogel_WLWT. And the Bengals off to a good start here, George. I'll tell you what, it didn't look so good midway through the third quarter, did it?
No, it didn't. When they're down 13 and looking the way the Bengals did, things aren't looking great. But the team was able to pull it together. Defensively, they were able to finally figure out a way to get some pressure on Andrew Luck and made the big turnover at the end of the game that sealed the deal because, you know, a lot of people were concerned. There's Andrew Luck marching them down the field for that winning score, but the ball went the other way, and the Bengals are 1-0.
Well, you know, it's funny, over 9 months, you guys beat us, that allowed the Bills in. We see the Bills the first time around. And, you know, for 9 months, you have to sort of pound it that you weren't good enough last year. And every transaction, every guy released, every guy brought in, every decision, certainly in Cincinnati, the coach is a big issue. Here in Baltimore, the quarterback's an issue. Ozzy's leaving. And yet, you know, you wake up on that Monday morning after you win, and, man, the air smells good, the water tastes clean, everything's perfect. After 9 months for a lot of these organizations that didn't win the Super Bowl last year, you know, the offseason's kind of tumultuous, and 0-1 for 16 teams in a league this week, it's a tough go.
Yeah, no, it is, and getting off to a good start is very important, and if you look historically at the Bengals, certainly their best seasons have been when they get off to a better start. It's kind of tough to play catch-up in the NFL. It can happen, but look, 1-0, 2-0, 3-0, you know, if it's the other way around where you're 0-2, 0-3, 0-4, you start seeing those percentages of, you know, teams that start 0-3. Here's how many make the playoffs percentage-wise.
Not a lot.
And you start realizing it's a lot tougher than just flipping a switch and winning 9 games in a row.
Well, you mentioned flipping a switch. I guess for the Bengals, there's a lot of moving parts, but a lot of continuity in a lot of places. I mean, look at this offense. Dalton, Mixon, Bernard, Green, Eifert, Boyd. We're familiar, Ross, we're familiar with all these names, but then there's the productivity in getting all the horses to the stable. You don't have Perfect on the defensive side, but offensively, this looks like the full complement, and I know more than anything, after they jettisoned most of the offensive line last year, this was the biggest part of their offseason reclamation was got to protect the quarterback, got to run the ball in order to win.
No question about it. And, boy, did they pay the price for losing those offensive linemen last year. And I guess price being the key word because that was their first-round draft pick, Billy Price from Ohio State, to play at center, a position that they just tried to kind of nickel and dime through the ages here where they, you know, won't go any more than maybe a third or fourth round draft pick to try to find a center. Finally, they got one in the first round, and he was by no means perfect yesterday. You know, he had an issue or two in pass blocking, but still he's a rookie. And I think that he's going to be a very good one, and he certainly is good enough to start from day one, and everyone seems to believe is a total upgrade over what they had last year. Then they bring in Cordy Glenn, the left tackle in the offseason from the Buffalo Bills, who, as long as he's healthy, and that was his issue last year, but so far so good with him, and he's helped solidify things. Clint Bowling's a pretty good guard they've had for a few years now, and certainly played very well yesterday. And they picked up Bobby Hart off the street, who had been with the Giants to play right tackle. Now, he had some issues yesterday, but still a lot better than what they had last year. In fact, there's 2 tackles on the team right now that started last year. They're both on the bench. So that offensive line is where it starts for the Bengals. And they brought in a new line coach because they felt like they needed a change there, and I think everyone agreed. And, you know, so far, so good with that. They're making progress there. Not a finished product, but better than last year.
Well, we got James Urban here, and certainly Marvin is the biggest story in Cincinnati, and I know you've been there since long before Marvin and this era, and there have been 2 or 3 times where a lot of other organizations would have parted ways with Marvin or any other head coach for that matter. Then I see the numbers, 5 out of 7 years making the playoffs. The Ravens are 1 out of 5 right now, so they're in a whole different place. But for Marvin, it was major controversy outside and maybe even inside Cincinnati that Marvin stayed along. The continuity, though, at 1-0, it serves him well right now.
Yeah, it does. And look, I really believe, Marvin's not the problem. I think there were probably some control issues that he didn't have full control, and he would totally tell me I'm crazy and don't say that. That's not right. But I never felt that he really had full control the whole time over his coaching staff and what assistants he brought in until this season when he was actually able to change coaches at that offensive line position. Because you're talking about a guy who had been here at the offensive line position since, the mid-'90s or so. And so it just felt like he never really had his own people in every position, and he finally got to make that move. Now, I don't know that was part of the deal that he stayed here and would only stay here if he had a little more control. But I just feel like you're right. The continuity can be a good thing, especially when you've had success. You've got to win some playoff games. But when you look at this organization and, pre-Marvin, and I know you don't want to keep going back to that, but by golly, here's the way I look at it. Who are they going to get that's better if they go out there right now the way this organization is set up, and you've got to constantly, run things through Mike Brown, who wants to win football games, but he also wants to save money. So sometimes, those two don't exactly go hand in hand, but I think Marvin's handled that situation as well as anybody could.
George Vogel is our guest. He is at WLWT in Cincinnati. All of our WNST programming brought to you by our friends at Freedmont Mortgage. Don't make a 30-year mistake by choosing the wrong lender. You need the right lender. We're going to be getting together next week with Alex Lewis of the Baltimore Ravens on Tuesday night. Circle that night on your calendar. We'll get you some more details a little later on in the week. All of our swabbings for There Goes My Hero and the Bone Marrow Registry brought to you by Freedmont Mortgage. We'll be doing some Ravens Live next week as well. Also brought to you by our friends at Costa Sing. Good enough for the Today Show and my mom, the fat crabs, the crab cakes, and don't sleep on the pit beef. Also, bands on the weekends, the real East Side, the real Crab House. It's Costas Inn. Say hello to Pete and Nick when you're over there. George Vogel joins us here from Cincinnati, and Andy Dalton, is he going to win at some point there? I mean, we're trying to chase our Super Bowl winning quarterback here out of town, drafting in the first round of Lamar Jackson. Certainly, and Andy Dalton was a guy that came in. I know Marvin has great belief in him. The offensive line needs to be perfect, and getting the Eiferts and getting the A.J. Greens and getting the Mixons on the field, that's what makes a B quarterback an A quarterback in my mind.
No, you're absolutely right. It does, and Andy's been his best when he has those weapons available to him and has a little bit of time to work with. Andy's really not a bad quarterback at all. He's a pretty darn good one. It just seems like, his bugaboo has been the big game or the playoff game or the big moment, something goes wrong. And something usually goes wrong with an interception or a sack and a fumble or something along those lines where it all gets pinned on him. But he's really, you look at his numbers across the board, and when he does have a decent team around him, he's an accurate thrower. He knows the offense very well. He runs it very efficiently. I can't have a complaint with this guy. Is he the kind of guy, that's going to lift people up like, Aaron Rodgers did in the Packers game? I don't know that he can do that, but there's not many can. How many of those guys are out there? Like 2 or 3, 4 at the most? So not everyone can have one like that, and Andy's certainly in that next tier after that, I believe. And here's the deal, though, on that offense. I talked about that offensive line. All areas of that offense, especially tight end and wide receiver, they're not very deep. So you got to hope, for the Bengals' sake, Joe Mixon stays healthy, and you got to hope Tyler Eifert can continue to run back out there on the field. And for goodness sakes, don't let anything happen to A.J. Green because he's the go-to guy.
Well, we play against A.J. Green on Thursday night without Jimmy Smith, and then you guys, obviously, another year without Vontaze Perfect. You talk about guys not getting onto the field. Certainly, Eifert's a difference maker. I don't think there's any doubt. Ross was drafted to be a difference maker last year. So many of these pieces have come back, and they all did get the post on Sunday, and even though falling behind a couple of touchdowns, they were a big, big part of digging the team out of there in the third and fourth quarter.
Yeah, Ross caught the touchdown pass Sunday on a little fade route to the left that usually goes to A.J. Green. In fact, the pass before, A.J. could have possibly caught but didn't, and they come right back to the second-year wide receiver, John Ross, and and he got his first NFL touchdown, and he's played much better already this year than what he did last year, which was absolutely nothing. He touched the ball one time last year, and it was a fumble against the Houston Texans, and that was it for John Ross as a rookie. So he's looking much better. He got pretty good reviews in camp, so that's a plus. And then Tyler Eifert, the guy's been injured so much, you just hold your breath every time. He had a few catches on Sunday, didn't play. It was very strange. I mean, he was kind of used sparingly in a way. I think they're being a little smart, at least in the early going here, of how much they send him out there, how much they ask him to block on running plays. But he's healthy and he's looking good. And I think as he gets more confidence, and I think as the team gets more confidence that everything's A-OK and he can take a hit without going on injured reserve, then that's a big, big plus for this team. No doubt about that.
Well, certainly after you guys played all 4 quarters to the end on Sunday, and the Ravens pretty much, at halftime, it became sort of the 6th preseason game for us.
Yep.
Joe Mixon getting the ball, being a part of this thing, obviously much maligned coming out of college. I mean, he was a guy the Ravens couldn't have selected in a million years after the Ray Rice incident here. I remember you had that who they going to rest next era down there in Cincinnati.
No doubt.
And Mixon's there and performing and I guess being a good citizen, right?
Yep. Everything's, A+ with him so far. Really the only knock, and it's tough, with some of these running backs to really give them a grade one way or the other in pass blocking. But because Joe's not asked to do that a whole lot. Generally on a passing play, he might chip somebody and go out on a route. But boy, Sunday he looked good. When they gave him a crack, he took it and, even moved the pile somewhat. He's a pretty big kid. So I expect bigger and better things out of him. And they had good success throwing to him. I think he had like 5 catches in that game. But, boy, they get him the ball in space and maybe a blocker or 2 in front of him, and he gets positive yardage and then some. So, yeah, that's, it looks like this might be his year. He was a rookie last year, but this is the year he establishes himself in this league as one of the better running backs. I'm not going to say a franchise back, but he is a really good receiver out of the backfield, and perhaps he'll surprise me and become one of the best backs in the league.
George Vogel joining us here from WLWT in Cincinnati. You can follow him out on Twitter at Vogel. That's VOGEL_WLWT on Twitter. They are the NBC affiliate in Cincinnati. All of our WNST coverage brought to you by the Modell Lyric. I want to remind everybody, John Cusack's coming in this week for the Say Anything screening and Q&A. If you love John Cusack, any of his movies, or you love the movie Say Anything, and I love the soundtrack to that, make sure you're checking that out at the Modell Lyric. There's magic at the Modell Lyric. You can find them at modell-lyric.com. And don't forget Steely Dan next month and Kansas coming in November. Also, Sporticulture. I've got my beautiful Ravens flower here in on the WNST vid cam. You can get them at Sport Eye Culture. That's Sporticulture out on the west side. Court is a local florist doing a big nursery, gigantic farm, doing these beautiful flowers. Bought the NFL licensing, local guy. If you want to learn the story, we'll be telling you more about that. Find them at sporticulture.com and send them anywhere, including Cincinnati. The Cincinnati Bengals are going to send their defense after Joe Flacco against this offense this week. And certainly some familiar names here, George. I mean, Atkins, Kirkpatrick, Dunlop, but a bunch of new names here and a bunch of moving parts on the defense. As much as that defense felt like it was the same guys for almost a decade, a little bit of change going on, including Hardy Nickerson II. And I know Marvin coached his dad in Pittsburgh back in the 90s, right?
Yeah, he got some decent time on Sunday because Preston Brown, the linebacker who played with Buffalo last year, he's a Cincinnati native who is now with the Bengals and a really good tackler. In fact, I think tied or was the league leader last year in tackles in the NFL. He went out with an ankle injury that doesn't seem to be serious. He played a little bit after that. But Hardy came in and replaced him and showed up okay. And then they've got a linebacker named Nick Vigil that's getting some time with Burfict out, who really had a terrific game yesterday. They've got Lawson rushing the passer some, and he's showed up well last year as a rookie doing that. And so they've got some change going on there. They got rookie Jesse Bates at safety. They cut George Iloka early in camp because, after a couple of weeks of looking at this kid, it's like, okay, we're good there. So we'll go with what we have with the rook, and he's starting for them. So, yeah, there's a little bit of change there. William Jackson's taken over a starting cornerback spot. Adam Jones is gone. So, there's been some change there, and I was a little worried about their depth there in the defensive backfield and really at linebacker too. But, it was the Indianapolis Colts, but they showed up well when they got their playing time on Sunday.
Well, I know it's a short drive for you from Cincinnati up to Indianapolis, and you made that trek on Sunday. Certainly the Andrew Luck story is as good a story in the league for his comeback, and I know Aaron Rodgers coming back. We got a bunch of people that were out for long stretches, Deshaun Watson last year, and trying to make their way back into this thing. For Luck, it certainly looked like Andrew Luck to me, and we saw him a couple of weeks ago in preseason action.
Look, for a long time in that game, and maybe for the entire game, he looked like the best player on the field, and you're sitting there scratching your head. This guy missed an entire season, and this guy was worried he would never play football again. It was amazing to see him perform the way he did. He's such a heady player. He feels the rush. He knows when to get rid of the ball. He's comfortable in the pocket. And if it's starting to collapse, he finds ways to dance out of it and buy himself time. He's an accurate thrower. And they, quite honestly, for most of the game, were killing the Bengals with the underneath stuff. Nothing long range, nothing really even intermediate. A lot of it underneath stuff. He was on the target. And, he's a terrific player, and it looks like he's back. He took a couple shots from the Bengals on Sunday, but kept ticking after taking the licking, and boy, he looks like he's all the way back.
George, Ravens 47, Bills 3. The Bills they might be the worst team in the league. And certainly the Browns have stepped up. We saw the Browns and the Steelers. Gave me a chance in the third and fourth quarter, honestly. You've been to Baltimore before. I went back onto the TV wall in the press area and watched your game, and I watched the Browns and the Steelers. I got to both of those games. They were both 2 touchdown scores when I turned them on in the third quarter. And by the end of the game, both of them had turned into incredible games. And I think for this division, it's all kind of coming together a little differently where there's no top and bottom. I think it's going to be a thicker middle. I think the Browns have gotten better. I think the Steelers have backed up a little bit. And I think the Bengals and the Ravens have both gotten better. This is going to be a fun year to watch football, and I think it's going to make it even more important for this kind of a game on Thursday night on short rest that the Ravens get out there and show themselves.
Yeah, there's absolutely no doubt about that. And the Bengals, whether they're 1-0, 0-1, you don't want to drop a home game in the AFC North. It's very important to try to win those home games in that division. And it is, I felt all off season that this thing was kind of up for grabs more so than what the pundits thought. I mean, everyone seemed to be handing Pittsburgh the title, from last January on. And I thought, their defense had been slipping a little bit, even though they showed up well for a little bit yesterday, but it was against Sunday, it was against the Browns. But it is. I mean, I did not expect to see the Ravens blow out the Bills the way they did. So the Ravens are probably maybe a little better than what I thought. I thought the Bengals were sneaky good. I thought they were better. I mean, there were totals out there that, they might win 5-6 games this season. I always thought they were a little better than that. And after their off season, after their draft, after the team started taking shape, I thought it was possibly a 8-9 win team, and perhaps more if things break their way. You just never know once a team gets off to a good start where they can end up. So yeah, this division's going to be, it's going to be way up for grabs. And hallelujah, maybe the Steelers and Browns can tie twice this season.
I said it's going to feel like a loss if they're 9-6-1 and we get to 10. That's for sure, right?
Yeah, exactly. No doubt about it. I mean, right now it's the Ravens and the Bengals on top of the division. And the Steelers tied for last with the Browns. Who would have figured?
George, you know the drill, man. We both have these crappy baseball teams in both these cities that all we have really is football at this point. You got problems with the Reds there, but nothing like what we're up against out here,
Well, I don't know. There are problems with the Reds that have been going on for a while now, and until they solve this starting pitching issue, and I don't know if they're going to be able to pay through the nose and get the starting pitching on the free agent market, and they haven't developed they've developed maybe one decent starting pitcher in the last 20, 30 years. It's amazing. It's amazing that this team can never, ever, ever compile good starting pitching. They had a decent rotation when Dusty was here, and Bronson Arroyo, Mike Leake, Johnny Cueto, Homer Bailey when he was still had somewhat of a healthy arm and still was somewhat of a factor. But now, oh boy, there's some guys on the horizon, but they're not getting here fast enough.
Well, I'll tell you what, you had that little period of time there, like 12 and 13, and it's always a small window in baseball, certainly for the small market teams, right? Like the teams that can't just reload, you get a year or two, and if you don't pull it off like Kansas City did, you go back into the tank the way the Royals, the Orioles, the Pirates, the Reds, just kind of goes on and on for a lot of these places.
Yeah, it really does, and the Reds waited too long to rebuild. The problem was, some of their players that were going to leave via free agency, they should have traded a year or two earlier, and Cueto being one of them. They knew they weren't, they knew it was going to be Bailey or Cueto they could afford, and they went with Bailey, and then they tried to trade Cueto, and it was just too late. That decision a year to a year and a half earlier, and you look at that Cueto trade, and right now, Cody Reed's the healthy arm skill in the Red system, and he hasn't shown much at the major league level. So, yeah, it's a shame, but boy, it's a long slog here for the Reds, I'm afraid.
Well, we all got spoiled back in the 70s, right? We thought Johnny Bench and Brooks Robinson were forever.
Yeah, you're right. Both cities had great teams, and unfortunately, Cincinnati gave you Frank too, and that's a guy I wish the Reds would have held on to.
Well, the Orioles never lost to the Reds, but the Pirates were a whole different story for us around here. So we have a lot of Pittsburgh angst around here, as I'm sure you do in Cincinnati as well. George, always good to visit with you. Look forward to seeing you for some chili. I'm bringing Luke out, my intrepid reporter for all things Cincinnati. He's never experienced the Cincinnati chili. You have any recommendations on how to do that properly?
Well, if I knew where you were staying, there's
downtown. I'm staying downtown.
Okay, there's skylines downtown, 4th and Sycamore. There's a skyline there you can hit. That has it. There's a little place called Camp Washington Chili that's kind of a little north of town, but it's their own little deal, and they do their own Cincinnati-style chili.
By the way, you're the third one that's mentioned Camp Washington, which I've never heard of before this week. And as you know, I'm a Cincinnati veteran, so I'm going to need – that's what I'm looking for, because the Skyline and the Gold Star, we're going to get that at the ballpark, right? Literally.
Well,
right?
there's Dixie Chili across the river, too, if you've never had that.
Dixie
Just
chili.
right across the river in Newport, there's one of those, and, well, there's several of them over there, but there's one close to downtown across the river. And, they have good double-deckers, too, but probably the best double-deckers are up at Camp Washington. They're really good.
Double-deckers. You gotta get a name for them. I've never heard them called that. That's fine.
Hey, they may have. Well, that's double-decker sandwiches, and they do chili.
Oh,
and, look, at the halftime of the Bengals game, the final preseason game, they had chili at halftime. They had cheese conies. So,
all right.
You could be in luck Thursday night.
It's a lot of indigestion after midnight, especially if we lose.
Yeah.
George, take care of yourself. Always a pleasure.
You got it. George
Vogel joining us here from the Queen City at WLWT in Cincinnati. You can find him, Vogel_WLWT, and at WLWT.com. You can find me out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world. The morning newspaper ships digitally to your email inbox. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life. Don't forget the John W. Brick 5K and the big weekend with the folks from Brick Bodies and Planet Fitness out at Timonium. That is my birthday weekend, October 13th and 14th. Also, the Wim Hof method, if you're into the Iceman. He cometh on the weekend of October 14th with our friends at Planet Fitness. Last but never least, the Maryland Jockey Club also sponsors our morning newspaper. The Laurel Race is open. They're moving the DeFrancis Dash because of the storm this week to next weekend. So the DeFrancis Dash moved to next weekend when Denver comes to town here. Also, the Maryland Million coming up October the 20th. at Laurel. Make sure you're getting down there and checking that out. Last but never least, all breaking news happens first on the WNST Tech Service. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. And, of course, Dennis will be here from 3 until 5, driving you home, getting you ready for the big game on Thursday night. Luke and I will be checking in from Cincinnati. It is the SSV on WNST, heard from 3 until 5 on Thursday. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. I am, much like Mr. Angelos, a very available individual. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook, as well as our YouTube, WNSTV channel. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.